lecture series. Tonight we have Jay Rotella with us. He's a professor in the ecology department at MSU, has been since 1992. You should be retired, shouldn't you? I came here the same year, and so Jay and I have got to know each other well as fellow ecologists working in population biology, I with plants and he with animals. But he certainly has done some amazing research and interesting stuff. His research focuses on studies of wild animal populations that are aimed at trying to understand what makes population numbers and composition change the way they do across years and across locations. He is especially interested in conducting research that can help inform conservation and management plans for wild animals. He has been involved with projects on diverse species of birds, fish, and mammals in Montana and the surrounding region, if you count Antarctica as a surrounding region. He has been continuously involved with a long-term population study of Antarctica's Weddell seal since 2002. His research has resulted in 108 peer-reviewed publications in more than 25 scientific journals and book chapters. Jay teaches a senior-level course in ornithology and graduate courses on population dynamics and on the analysis of population data. He's committed to training the next generation of wildlife scientists and managers. He has a BS degree from the University of Vermont, a master's from Washington State, and a PhD from University of Idaho in Moscow. So I'll let people filter in here a little bit. I'm Bruce Maxwell. Did I say that before? Oh. I'm Bruce Maxwell, and I'm the director of the Institute on Ecosystems here at MSU. And we try to do these distinguished lecture series once a month. And we'll be doing one in March and possibly one in April. So keep an eye out for those. We'll be advertising in the paper and elsewhere. So without any further ado, Jay Rotella.
I like it when you applaud before I go. That's good. Can you hear in the back? People in the back, Erica. If Terrell can hear me, then I know it's good, because Terrell shot a lot of guns and used a lot of heavy equipment over the years, so he's a good test. So if at any time you can't hear me, if the people in the back can just kind of wave their arms, I'll work on it. Gave some lectures today and other things, so I'm a little bit hoarse, but it's great to be here, so thanks to Bruce and the Institute for having me, and nice venue. I always ask when you come in and give a talk about Antarctica, do you have a nice screen? That's a nice screen, so that's awesome. And the project is always a fun one to talk about. It's a beautiful place, a beautiful animal, and we're very lucky. But the challenge is trying to give everybody credit that has helped on this. So Don Cinefish, you'll see, is the instrumental person who got this started decades ago. And Bob Garrett was next in line and got me involved. And then we've had a whole host of grad students. We've had 10 MSU grad students. Probably over 100 different technicians have gotten to go down. And then all the people before we took the project over. So it's a big team effort. And then, of course, there's all the people on campus with accounting and keeping a project like this flowing. The money comes from the National Science Foundation. This project's been funded for 40 years that way. And of course it's run through Montana State since 2002. And the government program specific to this project is the United States Antarctic Program. What I'm going to do is give you an overview. So the outline of the overview is a little background on the species, some history of the project. Unlike real hard-hitting science talk, I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about the life that we have there and how we do the work a little bit more. And then the key findings, I'm going to kind of do more data light. So if you were hoping that there would be some R code running and Bayesian analysis happening live, this is not your night. If you were hoping to see some videos and a lot of pretty pictures and some overview findings, this could be better for you. And as I said, I feel like I'm not going to do justice. In fact, we have one of our grad students is working on male Weddell seal data and have very interesting findings. I saw Jamie come in, and That is not going to get highlighted tonight because I'm going to talk about the females, just for the sake of time, not that the males don't matter. The Weddell seal, a short introduction to the animal, is a truly Antarctic species. It is the southernmost mammal on the planet, and we are working on the southernmost population of the southernmost mammal. And it's around the coastline of Antarctica, not contiguously, but it's just in the bays that have the right conditions. And it's not endangered in any way. It's a species that's crudely estimated to be just under 1 million animals, so we're not studying them because they're endangered. We now have 2 females in the history of the study that have lived to be 31, so we'll see if we find any older ones. We had 1 last year and 1 3 years ago, so they're rare. So if you go on National Geographic, it says the average lifespan is 30. I looked at that yesterday. It is not. It's probably about 12, maybe 7. They don't live very long, but that's the maximum life. They weigh about what you think of as a horse, pretty good sized horse. They've got short legs, the seals do, compared to a horse. And so they don't look as heavy as a horse perhaps, but when we've weighed them, that's about the biggest one. Caitlyn Mcdonald is here, and she's weighed some that are up that high. So the animal is a great diving mammal, the second best diving mammal on the planet, only to the southern elephant seal. Breath holding about an hour-ish, maybe a little over an hour in a forced dive. And so their lives are hunting fish, squids, things like that under the ice sheets of Antarctica. And when you get under the ice sheets, I don't do that. In fact, I do everything in my power not to get under the ice sheets. But the divers who are trained and equipped to do so bring back incredible images of the life under the water, under the ice. And so the animals are very comfortable under there. We have great access to them during October, November, December, when the animals haul out to give birth. And so they come in under these ice sheets using that breath holding ability. And along the coastline of Antarctica and along islands and so on, the ice is blowing from the strong winds and the tides are still moving the ice sheets up and down. We have about a 1 meter tide where we work, so you can have tides about that high. And the ice attached to the shoreline doesn't move very well. And the ice out in the open ocean goes up and down by about 1 meter. And so you get this, you can kind of make out this line along the shoreline, and there's cracking, and the seals can wriggle their way out and haul out. And they're very safe from predators. And by doing this, they're safe from orcas because they have better ability to get back into under those ice sheets away from the open water where the orcas are cruising. So to give you a different perspective on that, this is the ice here that's attached to the land. And the ice on the right side is over open water and going up and down in the tide. The tide is out in this image, and the seals are laying there, hauled out with their newborn babies. The animals are pretty remarkably tolerant of us. This is Jesse DeVoe took this and just put a camera down, and the seals just have no fear of us for the most part. Because they're on these open flat ice sheets, they really are remarkable. This is a leopard seal, a crab eater, and a Ross seal, the other 3 true Antarctic seals. And they live in the pack ice, which is a pretty daunting environment to try to go work in and do what we do back on these ice sheets. So the other species of Antarctic seals, like most marine mammals, are very hard to work on and do detailed work. People put transmitters on them and monitor them a little bit, but you just don't get to do the kind of work you'll see here tonight on most marine mammals. We also, Garrett and I do a lot of work here in the Yellowstone region and around Montana, and we also don't get to do the kind of work you'll see here tonight on 1,000-pound carnivores that live around here. James Weddell was a British sailor, navigator, and seal hunter. And he went and set southernmost records in the early 1800s for sailing. And they were commercially motivated. He went down, they found Weddell seals. He drew this. Not quite what they look like, but perhaps on a sealing ship in the 1800s, he might have been the best artist on board, I don't know. But he got the dots right, the proportions are a little off. But they were killing huge numbers of seals at that time around the Southern Ocean, the Falkland Islands, South Georgia Islands. Sealing and whaling was a big activity, and the Weddells were of interest, but mostly they were after fur seals and others. The sailing ships kept coming from Britain and other parts of the world, exploring Antarctica in the 1800s into the 1900s, the age of discovery and the heroic age. And where we work is just at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. So here's New Zealand. In the green there, you can see the islands. And people went to this green triangle because it's the closest you can get to the pole by boat. It's open water down to a good bit of the way into that green triangle at the bottom. And so people were very much trying to exploit it for resources, but also there was a race to the pole. And so the race to the pole, boats could get as far south as Ross Island. And then you hit the Ross Ice Shelf, which is quite remarkable in its extent and its thickness. And then they got their sledges and started marching. This was Amundsen's Norwegian group route that won the race, and this was Scott's route. They were quite similar in distance. So this little area here, there's a little island there, Ross Island, in that blue box. It's right at the edge of the ice shelf, and that's where we live and work. The ships stopped in those places long before we were doing science there. This is in 1902, one of Scott's early expeditions, and they got there with great enthusiasm and excitement about the journey and the race to the pole. They also took advantage of the seals. They certainly killed lots of seals for fuel, for heating, because of the blubber. And they had great enthusiasm. It's always interesting to see the pictures of them at the start of the journey and then late in the journey when people were starting to die and have severe frostbite. They didn't quite have the gear we have now. They didn't have GPS. They didn't know where everything was, and they certainly had limited clothing. There's some amazing stories. 3 of the main explorer huts are in the study area where we work, and there's great stories. A lot of these things are named after people in this picture. But this is one of their huts from one of the early expeditions, and this is now McMurdo. So we have a little more infrastructure than they did, and they did do a fair bit of science, the British expeditions in the region. Not too much on Weddell seals, some on penguins, some on the seals. They have lots of pictures from the early 1900s that they took and preserved. But it's interesting to think about what they were capable of doing and what we can do now with major fuel depots, internet, carpentry shops, welding shops, and so on. So this is a picture from 1902 of their sledging expedition. They made it about 3 miles, I think, the first day, and camped out at Big Razorback Island. And these are seals you see in the foreground. So a lot has changed, but this fortunately has not changed. This was a couple of years ago here, almost in exactly the same spot, working on seals at Big Razorback Island. And the seal numbers look quite similar to what was in those old pictures. And the seals really are this tolerant of us, for the most part, not always, but for the most part. And the Ross Sea is not just convenient for getting far south, it's convenient because it's got a remarkable ecosystem. It is considered to be the most pristine ocean marine environment left on the planet. It is not completely pristine. People did hunt whales and seals there at one time. There is some pollution, but not much compared to most of the world. This is an area that is not experiencing much climate change. If anything, the ice sheets are more extensive and perhaps thicker, perhaps not. There's some discussion of that, but it's not a place that's changing rapidly like the Arctic. It's not a place that's changing rapidly like the Antarctic Peninsula, the big tail of Antarctica that hangs off towards South America. So this is a place that's as pristine as we have. And so we get to live out with the seals on the edge of the island, and we have McMurdo Station is right at the tip of that arm, about 14 miles from where we live. And we have a large number of seals to work with. And the seals are very faithful to this site year after year after year. If they're alive, they come back there, which is very, very convenient for population work for us. So, whoops. It sounds like this is cutting in and out. See if I can get it to be better. The project history, getting into the period we're going to work in, Ian Sterling was a Australian-New Zealand combo researcher, and he started doing work in the McMurdo area in the 1960s. This was a period when New Zealand was killing quite a few seals for their sled dog teams. That stopped in the 60s. And he did some counting and some early work describing the lives of the animals. And then Don Seneff, pictured here coming out of an old Scott tent, started really doing the work with the then young United States Antarctic program in 1968. Don was a professor at the University of Minnesota, and Don wrote a memoir recently, and he described that this long-term project is really a series of 2-3-year grants, because what you have to do is constantly write to the National Science Foundation about what amazing thing you're going to do in the next 2 years. And they were originally, trying to study behavior and mating behavior and territorial behavior. And they started tagging the animals so that they could keep track of how old they were as kind of a side aspect. And then they realized that that was actually really interesting, and it took off. They standardized the methods that are used in the field in 1968, and we still use the exact same approaches today. So we're very fortunate. Don led that for 20 years, gave the project to one of his former grad students for a few years, trying to help keep the thing going. And then that person got busy with Alaskan work, and it came back to Don for another nearly 10 years. So he put in about 30 years on this thing. Bob Garrett, pictured here next to me in the lower picture, Bob came to me in 2000 and said, would you like to go to Antarctica and study seals? And I said, yeah, really, really would. And I'm really, really glad I said yes. Bob was Don's grad student, and we went to Mark Young, who was with EPSCoR and running that at the time, and said, can we have a little money to get this thing going for 1 year so we can check it out? And so MSU really pitched in for that one pivotal transition year and helped us get over the hump. And then we wrote a full proposal to NSF and have been going ever since, and are funded through 2021 or something like that. So we'll have had the project here for 20 years, and we'll see how that goes into the future. But the project has continued on. This is a 1975 crew. I think these are the same boots they issued me this year. We still wear the Korean era bunny boots, and they still work fine. I don't know, maybe the parkas, I don't know, we may have new parkas, but I'm not sure. But they all work just fine. We use very simple gear down there. We have lots of clothing options, and we always find lots of people around Bozeman that want to go down and wear rubber gloves and get their hands behind some dirty, wet seals and tag them. We have an easier time of getting there than the explorers used to. We go with U.S. Air Force planes. Air National Guard flies us down there. And it's sometimes interesting cargo. This is a helicopter being flown down there inside the cargo plane, but they take good care of us. We get there and fly to New Zealand, commercial air, and then Air National Guard on Air Force planes to sea ice runways. So we land out on the ice and then get bussed up to McMurdo. And the flight in there is pretty remarkable if you get to see out the windows and it's not fogged in or clouded in. The mountain scenery is staggering. It's quite the place. And then the last little leg of the flight, the last few miles, flies in over the study area, and the wildlife is really along the coast. And so this is the island where we live, but there are seals here and here and here. This is a big floating ice tongue coming off of the big mountain here. And after a few days in McMurdo, the crew, usually a lot of the people that are here tonight have done this for us. They go to McMurdo, they get safety training, they get the food organized, they get the gear out of winter storage and get it organized. And then we get someone from McMurdo who just happens to have a bulldozer to haul these out onto the ice, our little circus train for us. And they haul this out, and then we go see who the neighbors are this year. We have solar power. You can see perhaps there's a little antenna up here. Caitlyn's really good at this. if you aim it just right, you can hit the right target in McMurdo and get us Wi-Fi and a radio signal, and we can talk to people, which is awesome. We also have, you can see propane, so we have heated huts. We have a fuel depot, and so we have enough fuel for the season where we have all these environmental precautions for spillage, and we have glaciers nearby that we can go get ice for cleanup water. And then we have a cooking and office hut that works really well. It's actually got a big picture window that looks out at Mount Erebus steaming away. We have lots of foods of all kinds. We give lots of talks to second graders around the area. And this picture I stopped using because it ends up being 10 questions about why do you eat so many cookies. Frozen food works really well. We have about 20 coolers ice screwed down around the huts, and we can keep that out there. There's nothing that bothers it other than the wind. And then we have a bunk hut for women, a bunk hut for men, area to work on gear and hang gear and dry gear and so on. Then we have an outhouse, and the outhouse is a little bit staged, obviously, but the outhouse is not connected to the ice or into the water. It all goes into buckets, and all waste, food waste, human waste, recycling, everything goes back home. So it's actually a pretty clean operation down there. We're right up against one of the islands. We have seals out the door. And then the first job is to get flagged routes because the wind blows so much down there, blows the snow around. You can lose visibility pretty easily on the sea ice. So we put bamboo wands up. They're 8-foot bamboos about every 50 meters. And because of incredibly bad weather, I got to participate a lot in that this year and be reminded of that that's real work because the weather tends to be a little rougher and our crews are just really great. They make the straightest lines in 40-mile-an-hour winds of bamboos. Very impressive group. This is kind of a typical day early in the season. And then eventually we've got the road systems in, and that's so you can navigate because you got to be careful just driving blind down there by GPS is not something we do. So we use the bamboos. And then we've got a camp set up. We've got seals nearby. We've got a nice flat ice sheet to drive on, and we've got McMurdo nearby, and we've got a seal that tolerates us. It's truly a dream come true to do what I like to do for a living. And then you got a seal that puts up with us. So finally we can start going to work, and we have our transport. And early in the season we might be carrying a lot of bamboos to mark cracks and dangerous crossings and where seals are and so on. And then we've got the red bags, our emergency bags, so we can stay safe out there with tents and stoves and food and sleeping bags. We've never had to open one. I hope we never need to. And then we just start going around. We tag seal pups, and these are born at a rapid clip right around Halloween. And we tag seals all day, every day for several weeks. And we record all the seals we encounter. Everything goes in a field book and in a field computer at every animal that we work up. So everything's really nicely done. We have really good systems. And the weather can be a little challenging early, but we've got pretty good systems of clothing. And then you're just out with seals all day. There's no other project I've done in wildlife in the last 35, 40 years of doing this that you just with the animals all day. It's kind of what we dream of, those of us who like the wild animal studies. Little video to bring it to life. It does get a little breezy there. I didn't know about the music. So yeah, it's pretty and windy, so it's pretty windy. Some of you may know Caitlyn Mcdonald. She finished her master's with us, and now she's doing her PhD. She's also won the Ridge Run, and we've used that talent to run things down. They're blowing away that I couldn't get to, but she could. So yeah, so we live out there. Lunch is out in the field with big thermoses of really hot water, ramen and hot chocolate and tea. Carry lots of energy bars and candy bars. This sounds like your life in Bozeman, doesn't it? We're very fortunate because we find lots of really energetic people who are really good at all this in this town, so it's great. But lots and lots of data logging, and lots of walking around with seals with beautiful scenery around us, and pretty spectacular glaciers that sometimes fall off. And so again, beautiful place. Tag all the pups, associate the pups with their mothers. Then we do 6 very formal surveys, 6 times staggered throughout the year. We count every seal, record everybody that's still alive, and keep the tags in good shape. So if a seal has broken tags, we replace those. So this has been going on intensively since '78, but really quite formally since the '73. And we now are up over 25,000 animals that we've tagged, and over 250,000 records where we've recited them. They're so faithful to the site that once we tag them, if they're alive, we're going to see them again. And so what's really neat is this last part down here where it says 80% of the animals are known age. You know, if I walk into an elk population here in Montana or a duck population, you don't get to walk up to the bird or the mammal and go, "Can you just tell me how old you are?" And here you can do that. We can walk up with a field computer, look up the tag number, and know the age. It's really quite useful because so many things change with age. I don't know if any of you are old enough to know that. People start telling you should retire, Bruce, yeah? Stuff like that. All right, so that's kind of an intro for a public talk. I wanted to spend a little more time on that stuff, and then we'll get into a little bit about what we've learned, and it'll be maybe briefer than some want, but maybe more detailed than some want. We'll try to hit the medium. What have we learned out there? So one of the things we do over the 40 years is track the population size. We count them up and how many babies are born, how many females are out there, and so on. So we have some interesting questions because this is some of the islands we work at, and some years the ice edge in open water is really close. And some years the ice edge is 50 miles out to the north. And so we're curious, well, what's the population's response to having the ice edge or the open water nearby and orcas nearby versus far away? We'll see an example of this where we had these huge megabergs break off and mess with the ecosystem about 15 years ago. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But the other kinds of environmental changes have to do with us. So people did start fishing in the area some years ago, I think about 15 years ago, maybe a little more than that, but not too much longer than that ago. A bunch of different countries are now fishing for this. This is an Antarctic toothfish, and you can buy it in kind of fancy restaurants as Chilean sea bass. It's expensive and it's tasty. This animal doesn't have a swim bladder. It floats in the water column by embedding a bunch of fat in its muscle. So when you cook it, it cooks in its own fat, and they taste really good. So people make a lot of money catching them. From the beginning of the study, the formal study years, up through when we came on board, the population had been pretty remarkably flat-lined. There were a couple years in the late 90s that were interesting, but by and large, the thing just kind of stable. And Don Sinif, when we were taking over, he said, yeah, the Antarctic is, for the most part, a really stable environment. And so we have a really stable population. It's just kind of flatlined and they've found their home. These icebergs broke off. So down here is Ross Island. And here's our study area. And this is the edge of the Ross Ice Shelf. And these bergs broke off, and one of them was the size of Rhode Island, and I've forgotten the details, but they're massive. And they swung around, the current swung them around, and then they crashed into the Antarctic coastline. The wind wants to push the ice out late summer to the north, and these kind of closed it off like a barn door so that the ice couldn't go out for a number of years. And it really caused some pretty remarkable impacts on the ice sheets, got jumbled and thick. Some penguin colonies were crushed, and it really was quite a remarkable event, and we were there. So when we arrived in 2004, we had this happen at the peak of this iceberg. And so this really was kind of an interesting time. We were sitting there going, I'll back up to that one. Did the seals die? Did they go elsewhere and we're never going to see them again? What happened to our study? Because it was really, not only were there many, many fewer mothers with pups, there just were like no non-breeding seals. It was just a ghost town. And fortunately, this is a funky orientation. This is Alaska, okay? This is the Pacific, and this is us down here. A typhoon in Alaska sent a wave train down the Pacific. It oscillated the icebergs and they shattered. They broke up into pieces that came ungrounded, and this was documented in a geophysics research letters article where they have buoys, electronic buoys down the Pacific that monitored this. And it's a pretty neat story for them. So we get to see what happened, and the seals recovered. Okay, so they had another year in there where they were kind of hurting, and then boom, they came back quite quickly. And whoops, sorry. And then since then, we've had these unprecedented highs. And in 2017, the numbers were through the roof. We had to get permits changes to tag all the seals because we didn't have permits that allowed us to tag them all. So it's been interesting, this experiment. And that was the numbers game, but then we've got tagged individuals, right? Everybody's wearing this unique number and color combination. So we can go, well, when they came back in numbers, was it the same seals or new seals or what happened? And what happened was it was the same seals that came back. And this graph, try not to have too many graphs, but I've got a few. This is the annual survival rate from 0 to 1, so everybody dies and everybody lives. And these are years going across here. And so here's our number of pups, here's our iceberg crash. And they just kept kicking. In fact, maybe this graph might indicate their survival was just fine. So what they do is a long-lived strategy of when times are tough, they back off on reproduction and they crank up all the energy they've got into staying alive. So it's just hedging their bets and only going after reproduction. They can only produce one seal pup in a year at best. Twins are extremely rare and doesn't usually end well for the twins for reasons you'll see in a minute. And so this is kind of something you would predict, but to be able to measure this and have an event this massive, this large of a climatic event, allow you to see that was pretty neat. So we've got some insights. Now this graph, I'm very pleased with. It's got things I like. It's got age distributions, it's got mountains, yeah. So these are years going up this vertical axis, and then we've got the age of mothers going across here. So wherever the mountain's high, that means there's a lot of mothers that year, that age. So in 97, there's a lot of like 11, 12-year-olds, a lot of 10, 11. So all the way up into the iceberg, which is the dark blue one, it's pretty consistent, and that's what we expect. They're typically in their start breeding at 7 or 8, and then they're heavy in breeding when they're in their teens, and then they start to fail and disappear in their 20s. The iceberg graph is interesting in that it's shifted to the right, the going, if you will, when the going got tough. And so then, drop those years out, and this makes me very happy. To have data where you can see something like that we've got these older females, and then what happened for several years was all these young females did not breed. And they were piling up in the wings, if you will. These young mothers is what we're learning. And then they start giving birth, and you can see them age through the years. And to have data that allow you to do that and analyze it and have it come out that cleanly is pretty remarkable. And then we've got eventually their daughters from back here start to recruit 7 years later, and you can see them coming in. But there's also this interesting saddle in our ridgeline. That saddle is the fact that during the iceberg, so few animals were born. We have like these holes in the age distribution because there were a number of years where so few pups were born. And it's amazing to think about the legacy effect of that 3-year event. And so when I study animals back here, and you have a hard winter, and it hits an elk herd or something that we're studying, these kinds of things that we learn down there give you different kinds of like you get hit in the head that, oh, remember, these things can be really powerful events in the lives of these populations. So that kind of thing is pretty exciting to us. And we think it's also why this thing kind of came back to a more normal number this last month, few months, was that we had so many young moms the last couple of years breeding that they just can't go every year. They're smaller and they don't have the body reserves to keep going year after year until they get into their prime. So we'll see some evidence of that in a little bit. So some overview things. Each of these slides was someone's graduate degree. But pups' life expectancy at birth is pretty limited, about 7 years, 6 years. And that's not long enough to get you to be a mom yet, for the most part. You're just barely getting old enough to be a mother, and they tend to be dead by then. So about 18 out of 100 pups that are born will go on to be mothers for the females. So it's hard to do that. And that's true here too. It's hard for all big mammals to pull that off, to get old enough. If you can make it to age 2, something changes and their survival rate takes a huge jump. And if you can get to 2 years old, then your expectancy is about 16 years of life. So you can get through that early period, and we see that with lots of big mammals around the world, but it's neat to have it so well known. Typical age at reproduction is about 8. We've had a few females start as early as 4, but most start at 8, and then they make a pup, take a year off, maybe make a pup, and then as they get into their prime, they'll go back to back, and then a year off, back to back, and take a year off. Okay, and one of the things we've done a lot of work on, and Terrell Patterson's here, he just finished his PhD a little over a year ago on this, is that we now have good enough data with known age animals to be able to kind of this arc of life. So this is maternal age, and this is the probability she'll produce a pup in a given year. And so early in life, nobody's starting before 5. I think we've had 2 that were 4 over the 40 years. But most of them don't even think about starting until 5. And then it picks up. And then about in their teens, it kind of hits its peak, and then it starts falling off. Their bodies look like they're breaking down. Terrell added some really interesting things to this, where we're finding that some animals have a much higher curve than others, and some have a much lower curve. So we have these kind of winners and losers out there. We have one female who just went year after year for like 20 years. She's like the queen, and her daughters look just like her now that they're old enough for us to get a sense of that. Terrell found something very similar for the survival rates. Not quite as extreme, but that the animals kind of peak in terms of their ability to stay alive when they're in their teens, and then they start to break down when they get into their 20s. So this what we call reproductive senescence and survival senescence. So most females, I said about 18% get to go on to have young, and the vast majority don't. 82% probably never have any young. Those that do make it to motherhood tend to have just a few in a lifetime. It's just a hard thing to pull off. And a very few have lived to be 31 and had as many as 22, but that's extremely rare. So we've tagged 25,000 or so animals. 12,500 of those are females, let's say. And we've had 2 live to be 31 so far. Now, a lot of them haven't had a chance yet because they were born 10 years ago, so they can't be 31 yet, right? But it is a rare thing to do. So think about this life. Bring her to life here. This is how you start your life. It's probably 20 below. This is not a windy day, so it's quiet, which is unusual when they're being born. But this is the only birth video we have of this quality that our outreach specialist took a few years ago, Mary Lynn Price. And you think about this pup on a 20 below day starting out, and they're good at this. But it's not easy to make it out there. The first challenge is getting born. We've seen pups die doing this. And then you've got to get big, and then you've got to not get eaten. So we'll start out with the birth part. I'll be quiet. Takes about an hour, shouldn't be long. So they dry off remarkably fast, and because the air is so dry, and then they roll in the dry snow and dry off quite quickly. A few do die within hours of birth, but the vast majority don't. And unlike like elk calves around here, where a death in the first few weeks, with these guys, almost everything survives the first few weeks of life because there's just nothing around to eat them. And if they don't have genetic defects or a breech birth or something, they do quite well. So the mothers and pups, they're pretty adorable. They really interact a lot. They're together nearly constantly early in life. The pups have this fleecy fur called lanugo, and they don't go in the water for about a week, and then they'll start swimming. And in the meantime, they just nurse. And the milk is about 48% fat. That's true of most of the marine mammals, around 50% fat. And they just lay on the ice and drink and drink and drink as long as the mother will let them. And the mothers come in with massive amounts of stored body reserves. They rely almost entirely on fat and body reserves that they bring. The mothers will go in the water, but they don't seem to be catching fish based on analyses of isotopes and fatty acids and so on. They seem to largely just maybe be going in to get some exercise and a break. And then eventually they're going to start teaching the pups to swim. But so they basically just lay there burning off body reserves, and the pups nurse and nurse and nurse. The Caitlyn Mcdonald's work had a lot to do with this part, her master's that she just finished, and she's staying on for a PhD, luckily for us. The pups will be born at about 70 pounds, and they'll typically get up to about 220 pounds in a month. Just over 35 days or so, I guess is what we use. And this is, I used round numbers here, 1,000 pounds down to 500 pounds is what the mom's losing. A lot of them lose a little less than that, might be 600 or 700 pounds, but they're losing a lot of weight. And so the pups gain about half of what the mother loses. There's some energy transfer loss along the way. So these mothers are doing a lot. So you start to see why they're not having a pup every year. And we've done a lot of work weighing animals. Some of the people in this room have done a lot of work weighing these animals we use a cattle weigh sled that specializes with skis and cranks. And then we put the pup in front of that, and the mother will crawl on. It's just easy, and it doesn't always work, but it tends to work quite well. And we can weigh these mothers. And but they only want to do that when their pup is really little. They won't follow the pup on when they're older. And we have a hard time moving that pup around as easily when they're older. So we've used various iterations of digital photogrammetry weighing methods. And Caitlyn has spent a lot of time, and some of the people in here, I know I saw people come in who have sat in front of computers for us a long time or been out on the ice taking these pictures. And we put these scale bars up and put them around the animals and then wait for them to be still, take pictures all around them. They can't move. Oh, they move, do it all again. It's tedious, but we can weigh them at different ages during the lactation this way. And then Caitlyn and her helpers go into software and they get 3D envelopes. And then we've got a bunch of females that we had on the weigh scale, and we know their weight and we know their volumes from the 3D, and then we can get their weights. So it's a lot of work, but it's really interesting. The pups are a little easier. They're not duffel bags, they're specialized weighing bags that have really strong reinforcements, because we've had pups up over 300 pounds that we've had to lift and weigh. But it goes quite quickly, and the animals are, for the most part, remarkably tolerant. One of the things that Caitlyn has learned is really novel just in the last 6 months or so, is that the lightest mothers are weaning lighter pups. It's not shocking, but we didn't know the magnitude. And the heaviest mothers can be weaning pups that are almost 100 pounds more. And you think you're about to be completely independent. So these pups have to go learn how to catch fish on their own. They're going to go into the Antarctic winter after that, and they're going to get chased by leopard seals and orcas. So we suspect that that weight difference might matter, and that's what our current new grant from NSF is about. It took us years to get this, and now we know what those pups weighed when they were weaned. Now we've got to follow them for a bunch of years to see who comes back as a mom. So everything with these long-lived mammals takes a while. These are seals, and so far we've seen them up on the ice. But the seals have to learn how to swim. So mothers don't just let them lie there on the ice and drink milk. Some of the mothers get in the water, and there are certain pups that just have a fit over this. And some pups just go right in the water, seem quite readily. And so Shane Petch is here. So Shane come in, and he's a master student with us who's looking at what can we figure out about why are some pups swimmier than others. We do know that some pups spend a lot of time in the water from Shane's preliminary work, and some pups just don't go in the water. Now, it's an interesting trade-off, because if you're in the water, it's cold, and you could be losing weight and shivering and burning up that milk you drink. But if you don't go in the water, you don't learn how to swim. So we're wondering if there's some Goldilocks perfect amount of swimming, and do some mothers get their pups to swim? Is it older mothers that get them to swim, or younger ones? And Shane will be giving a thesis defense before too long. It goes fast with these guys. And we'll see what he can learn about that. That's one we don't know much about, but we have a lot of data on. What we're doing. Pause that. Because one of the things we're wondering is if some mothers are behaving differently. So there's these maternal effects that were nutritional that Caitlyn worked on. What Shane's working on is maternal effects on their offspring that are behavioral. And some mothers, and we don't know if it's certain mothers do this over and over, really work on making it easier for their pups to get in and out of the water. The ice is about that thick, and it's a vertical wall, and these young pups aren't good at coming out. And this mother was very good at making a ramp, so we'll let you enjoy her. Her pup's in the water behind her, and it was struggling to get out minutes before this happened. See that she'll just keep coming up and trying it with her chest. So it's pretty remarkable. So they'll keep trying that ramp with their chest, and then we've seen them go underwater and then come out with a pup on their head and shoulders and just kind of eject them if they really struggle, because they've got a lot invested in these pups at that point. And so Shane will be working with these little temperature loggers that tell us when the pup's in the water. The water there is 28 degrees when it's liquid with the salt in it. And so we have a pretty good record of when they're in the water with a low-tech little device that we can put on and then take off at the end of the season. So we think this might matter because this is what they're going to face. So at 40, 50 days, mom's gone, and they've got to go out and deal with these guys. This is from the BBC Frozen Planet series. These are predators. So the Weddell's a 1,000-pound carnivore, and the orca's a whole nother deal. It's like a pack of really big, fast-swimming wolves. Concerted dives, They'll make standing bow waves that are 6 feet. I've talked to the people that filmed this. This is from the Antarctic Peninsula. And they can break up the ice flows that the Weddells are on as the ice sheets break up. This seal makes it for a long time. If you want to know the ending, you have to go watch their movie. It's not mine to show us, but pretty remarkable. And we do have orcas that come in right near our study area. In fact, I know some of the technicians have been there when they've come in and have seen them close to the study area. So a really remarkable predator going after a slightly lower level predator. The other thing these seals are dealing with is El Nino, La Nina stuff, and we're really interested in our new grant about pursuing this. I don't have answers for you yet, but this is where we're headed. So we have things about the mothers. Some are dynamic, like how old and experienced she is, and some are static, like what year was she born and what's her genotype and things like that. We do collect tissue for genetics and are working with some geneticists now. And so the mothers are doing a lot of things for their pups, and then we've got extrinsic things like the El Nino stuff. And so we're very interested in how the environment and the maternal things all play out to affect phenotypic features of the offspring, like how much it swam, how much it weighed, and so on. And then we hope to, by the end of this grant or the next one, tell you what we learned about how offspring fitness is coming about, because we're seeing huge differences in the outcomes of animals' lives, and we'd like to know what's driving that. So that's kind of where we're at. So hopefully that was interesting. And I just don't leave without showing people penguins, because I found that's not good. You can't get out of the room in full health if you don't show penguins. So we do have a few penguin photos. They come visit us in camp, and we do enjoy them. They're beautiful, and they're just hard not to, they make you laugh. I remember Caitlyn saying, her mom is here, that she saw them the first time and she said, I can't remember the age, I think she said 5-year-old Caitlyn would have just died if she could be here. So we're very lucky to get to go down there and see this beautiful place and have this great data set. And it's really been a treat to share it with you. And I do want to thank all the people in the room who have worked down there with us, because it's real work, but it's also a real pleasure. So thanks, everyone. Before I close, I'll just say, if you want to see more, if that wasn't enough, give me more. Weddell Seal Science is our outreach site. There's podcasts, there's YouTube videos. And then the last thing is, if you like Instagram, my daughter Sophie's sitting here in the second row. She runs the Instagram site with us, and we send her pictures and quotes, and she does a great job of putting that together and putting factoids out for the public. And so we've got a lot of ways for people to learn about it. So thank you.